Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen. With us for our program today, Assemblyman Tom McKevitt, representing the 17th Assembly District in New York State. That includes, of course, parts of Nassau County. We thank you folks across Long Island for tuning in for our program today. Tom McKevitt, nice to see you.
Great to be here, Mike.
We got some catching up to do. We're going to get an update from the Assemblyman as to New York State's fiscal situation. And if you're reading your newspaper headlines, you've already gotten an indication that things are not as good as had been hoped for, as New York State trying to pull itself out of some economic doldrums here over the past couple of years, worse than doldrums, maybe fiscal crisis just a year ago, and things aren't going all that well. We're going to get an update from him on that, talk a little bit about the labor contracts New York State has put together with its unionized employees, so we will get all that going on today. But you took part in a pretty I don't know how interesting it is. I was going to say an interesting hearing that took place in New York City on the issue of mortgage foreclosure. If not interesting, it certainly is a hearing that garnered an awful lot of attention from those in the know in the Albany and state political scene.
It was a contentious hearing, I guess we could say that way, over a topic. And certainly, mortgage foreclosure is a very, very important topic these days, particularly in Nassau and Suffolk County, which is really, I think, has some of the highest foreclosure rates in New York State. Certainly when you had the subprime crisis during the mid-2000s, and which coming out of that, you have a lot of people who are simply underwater in their homes. You have many situations where people have mortgages which are more than the value of their real estate which they have. So some people are just simply walking away from homes, and you can see driving around the neighborhoods, you'll see the grass 2 feet high because they've walked around with it, no one's taking care of it. And so it is becoming a very, very big situation. And I think what we have to do is creatively work on situations whereby the most frustrating thing I hear from people is, they know they're in a tight situation, they're in trouble, they want to do a modification with the banks, and the way the whole system works out is that sometimes it's more worthy to the banks to foreclose than to work out modifications with people. I think we have to do some sort of better job than that, maybe through the court system, on allowing people who really want to stay in their homes to stay there, because I think it's really to everyone's benefit that's the case. What happened at the hearing, something different was more of really, just really attacking people more than anything else, and just a situation of trying to get more money towards some sort of legal services agencies, which may be helpful to some extent, but I don't think it really solves the problem. It's really not helping people at the end of the day.
There was a bill that came up in the legislature right at the end of the legislative session. You got up, you debated, you spoke on it.
Yes.
Explain how that bill fits into the discussions that are taking place now.
What I think the purpose of the bill is that sometimes during the foreclosure process, there's an indication whether all the paperwork was done correctly, whether the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed. Some of the banks were very sloppily doing the foreclosure process. So the point of the bill was try to go and hold the banks to a stricter standard. I think it's unnecessary for a couple of reasons. Number one, the courts are doing that anyway, number one. Number two, we have the longest foreclosure process in the United States. Right now, it takes an average of 940 days foreclosing a home. So regardless of the place where you're talking the situation whereby people may be trying to fight to stay in, where people are going and walking away from the homes and you want to go and maybe turn the house over to someone who will productively use it, we're talking 3 years. Number two. Number three, there is a provision in this bill which will require the banks to have the original mortgage and note in hand, which doesn't happen, is virtually impossible. So really the end of the bill was there be no more foreclosures in the state of New York. Maybe good to some people, but in the other instance, it would resolve in the fact that banks would not longer loan money to people anymore, and that's not good.
Let's take a look at some of the remarks you made when that bill was up for debate on the floor of the Assembly, and we'll be back with more Assembly Calendar and Tom McKevitt.
I think everyone's in agreement that if a person's going to bring an action to foreclose a person out of their house, something which is very sacred, something very important, that the right person is the one in court, that they have the ability to prove that, yes, we are the owner of this mortgage and note, and oftentimes these documents get traded and sold to other banks and institutions, and I think that's important. But I think there are a couple of concerns here I have with this bill. First, that issue is one which can be raised any time of the proceeding. And I think there should be some sort of time limit, as is right now, that be done at the answer, at a very early part of the proceeding. So if that's a question, we don't waste 1, 2, 3 years of litigation time and time among the parties to see if this is really the right person in court that this should occur. And my second issue is the fact that the bill requires the original document. And even though the sponsors give some indications where the law will allow some exceptions where you can go and come up with other reasons why you don't have the document, the bill itself doesn't say that. And I can tell you that with the number of foreclosures in the state and number of judges we have in the state, there will be instances where a judge will say, the statute says you must plead this, that you have the original note and the original mortgage. And again, in the real estate closing, the bank doesn't even keep that original mortgage. The mortgage goes from the title closer to the county clerk, and maybe it will get back to you, maybe it won't. And I'm just fearing that will be just one unnecessary hurdle in a very legitimate foreclosure action in making this process go forth. So for those reasons, I will be voting in the negative and urging my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
What I don't know about mortgage foreclosure could fill this room and a couple more. It's that I love it when somebody on the assembly floor stands up and speaks on an issue who's got real practical experience and knowledge on something and says, oh yeah, well, I can see what you're trying to do here, but as somebody who does this all the time, let me tell you, this is not maybe a good idea.
Yeah.
So that bill is a bill that you're telling me really isn't going to go too far in the legislative process. Are these hearings that are being held maybe going to come up with some kind of positive legislation that maybe will be coming up in the 2012 legislative session?
What I found frustrating with the hearings were the hearings didn't talk about productive legislation to fix the problem. The hearings all came about to the fact of, let's make the bank give us lots of money in order to go and hire more legal services and just prolong the process. That was the sum and substance of the hearings, and didn't really go and talk about productive legislation. I think that's where our focus should be, not going and just banging your hand on the table and telling people just choke up more money for us so we can use it against you.
So, perpetuating a system that's not working is what you're talking about.
It's a failed system and just prolong an already failed system. My attitude is there are ways we can maybe fix the system. That's where we should be paying our attention, not towards making the current system more expensive.
Well, that gets us right into our next topic, failed systems and expensive systems. We're now going to turn to the state budget and get an update from Tom McKevitt as to what's going on here in Albany right now. It was thought after the current budget was put in place by the legislature and the governor that there was some positive news coming out of the accountants' offices here that count the beans and see how things are coming. The early returns were pretty favorable.
They were very favorable.
Not so much lately.
When we got our first receipts, remember New York State is backwards compared to every other state, that our fiscal year begins in April instead of in January or June like other places. Because frankly, when we do our budget back in March, the one thing we don't know is what are our revenues. Tax day is April 15th. So we're not quite sure how it all comes out.
It's all guesswork.
We're guessing. It's sometimes educated, sometimes very uneducated guessing is our whole budget process. So we did that this past year. And when we had our first quarter of receipts which came in, they came in $800 million above projections. So we thought this is a great sign.
Yay!
We're actually going to go and finish the year with maybe a $2 billion surplus. And then the second quarter came in. And it looks like right now that we're arranging, depending upon the governor's office, says we're about $350 million short. The Assembly Minority Republican Ways and Means Committee came out with our report yesterday, and we come out around $420 million short. And not to beat our chest on this, but when you've looked at the last 6 years upon the projections of conferences, the Republican Ways and Means Committee has been the most accurate every single time. We're maybe more pessimistic than most, but we're just being realistic. So we're looking at this year of about $420 million in the hole, and looking at 2012, 2013, where we hope we'd be balanced, we now be looking at almost $3.5 billion in the hole that we have to fix for next year as well.
Well, how did you get from $450 million up to $3 billion plus or more? You're saying that right now the state, your numbers are telling you the state's only several $100 million in the hole.
For this year, for 2011, 2012. Then we have to look at 2012, 2013. That's the budget that we're going to do at that point. And we look at that revenue be down, extrapolating out, looking at expenses. And I mean, for example, one thing the governor had promised to do for 2012, 2013 was to increase spending on healthcare and education by 4%. So when you add all those factors in, right this year we were looking at a zero flatline education and actually decrease in health. So when you extrapolate all that in, we're again into the billions, into the red. Now last year we were 10 billion, and we're able to go and cut that deficit without raising taxes and be able to do it. Now the challenge continues. I mean, now we can say, well, it's only 3 billion, but 3 billion is still a lot of money.
Well, I was actually feeling pretty good because I misunderstood and thought we were looking at maybe 450 million in the hole going into next year's, but that's actually in the current year's budget.
This year we're short $420 million for this year.
Well, you know what the answer is. I mean, all you need to do is listen to the folks at Occupy Wall Street, or here in Albany, the Occupy Albany. They had the answer very clearly, the millionaire's tax.
Yes.
That's going to solve everyone's problems. But I'm very much tongue-in-cheek on that, because there's a lot of people, including the governor here, who don't think a millionaire's tax, but the Speaker of the Assembly, Sheldon Silver, has said he would support it. It sounds like that is going to be one of the topics of discussion heading into the next round of budget talks.
It is going to be, I think, the topic of discussion, but right now both Senator Skelos, the Senate Majority Leader, and Governor Cuomo are very much unified in their position on this. And they'll look at it two ways. Number one is, Governor Cuomo has said that he actually supports a national millionaire's tax as far as that's concerned, but he doesn't support it on a state level. Why? Because people generally like the United States of America. They're not likely to leave to go other countries, to go places like that. People have been leaving New York in droves for the last 10 years, and his position is this is just going to go and accelerate even further. So his point is, if we do that, the people who are paying most of those taxes, forget about even Florida or North Carolina, Texas, go to Connecticut. Right. The millionaire people who are in Manhattan are going to go to Greenwich, Connecticut, pay a lot less money, still work in Manhattan, make their money, but not pay their taxes to us. So that is one very big concern he has with that. And number two is, from Senator Skelos' perspective, is we're looking to be job creators in New York State. You know what? One way you could certainly do it is by taxing all the millionaires for 1 year, then they're gone, and that's where it goes. Well, another way you can bring in $2 billion of revenue is let's go and create an environment to bring businesses into the state and create jobs. And if those people at Occupy Wall Street were going and making revenue instead of sitting down there doing nothing, we would actually go and have a lot more revenue that we'd have to deal with at this point. So there's another solution, just raising taxes all the time.
I'm kind of amused to see the New York Post at the bottom of its editorial page every day throw the governor's quote out there about how do you expect, if you're going to keep adding on taxes and things, to have a rosy economic future. Sort of hold everybody's feet to the fire against the idea.
Exactly right.
I guess they must see that that's going to be one of the big topics coming up soon too. In our last couple minutes, we do have the news that things have kind of settled down by way of the public employees of New York State. CSEA and now PEF have both ratified the two arguably biggest contracts of public employees in the state.
Right. And what happened initially was CSEA came up with their agreement back around June. We were able to finish that up and ratified that before we left for our summer break. Tried to do the same thing with PEF. And when the vote came down, it got voted down pretty significantly at that point. Within hours, when that contract was voted down, Governor Cuomo issued 3,500 pink slips.
As he said he would.
And he was a man of his word. And I think the most important thing about Governor Cuomo is he doesn't fool around, he doesn't kid around. He means what he says what he means. And I think that's an important thing, how leadership has changed in Albany.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, he told the unions, here you go, these people are going to be laid off. And people are there calling my office saying, I don't want to lose my job. I said, well, you have to tell your colleagues that they control whether you keep your job, not us. The governor made it very clear. He needed $450 million worth of savings. It can either come through contract negotiation or layoffs. None of us want to lay off people. That's the last thing you want to do, because frankly, that's personal unemployment, not working once again. Right. But the fact is, we can't go down the road we've been the last 20 years. The bank is broken. People have no more money. We had to go and make a change. And when it came down to the revote, it passed almost 70. It was overwhelming. I mean, you don't get election returns as good as people will see, because I think the employees finally realized we are in a new dawn, we're in a new era, this has to be done.
And that is an era that the state is going to have to really remember or be cognizant of as it heads into upcoming budget talks, which are only weeks away here at the state capitol. Tom McKevitt, thanks as always for coming in and joining us, letting us know what's going on. We want to thank you folks too for spending your time with us. We'll hope to see you again soon for our next edition of Assembly Calendar.